Today we're going to talk about creativity and perseverance because they kind of go hand in hand, right? I have taught creativity for nearly 20 years. To students, to my employees, to friends. And when I say students, I lecture, so I'm not a professor anywhere. Creativity is really, really interesting because it's usually the kernel of all the art that we talk about. Some people are able to critique art, but they're unable to create it, which is very interesting. I meet people all the time that say they wish they were creative. Inside that statement is sort of a defeatist concept of themselves. When I explore an individual who says they wish they were creative, I typically find a cascade of history within their life that is them attempting to do something which is creative by their definition, and they failed according to their rules. After being mentored, they realize they defeated themselves for no particular reason, and they tend to get very excited when someone who has succeeded several times being creative sort of lets them know, hey man, there's no rules to this thing, within reason, right? I've bumped into a couple different people in my lifetime that there's two funny things that I run into where people say they're not creative, and they are. They prove it. What the hell's wrong with this microphone stand? I let the center of the thing fall lower than it should. Hang on. There we go. Just gotta adjust it down now. The two different types of people I run into are, it's pretty funny. They show proof that they're creative, but then they say they're not. Or they say they wish they were. And so I like to find individuals that think they're not creative and then just learn about them a little bit, observe them, and then prove to them that they're just incorrect in their own assumption about themselves. And it's very invigorating for them to figure this out because they're realizing, oh my gosh, I am creative. I just didn't know it. One is that people sometimes can manicure their bodies really, really well. They have an amazing look. However they look, they've mastered it. They've got a great regimen of clothing that they wear. And you look at them and you're like, wow, you look fantastic. The amount of places you had to search to buy clothing to look as great as you look must have been extremely difficult. And you picked and chose things that make you look fantastic. So you are extremely creative and you're aware of color theory, and you're aware of spatial design and cut and patterns, and you're aware of the way your face looks versus how your body looks, that sort of thing. That's one person I run into. And the other one is someone who is scared of scary movies. They can't watch scary movies. And I go, well, why can't you watch scary movies? And they'll say, well, because I can't sleep at night. I have all these visions of things. Now, on the other side of the conversation with that same person, they'll say, oh, well, I'm totally not creative. I wish I was creative. And I'm sitting there looking at them like, wait a minute. You're a grown adult watching a fictional film about some scary thing. And then when you go to bed, your non-creative mind is creating these amazing things that tap into your id, that tap into your ego, and freak you the hell out. So you're totally creative. You're just not harnessing the engine inside you to apply it to things that you want to be creative with. Now, creativeness is so diverse, it's crazy. But I'm just going to go through the ones that I do for a living. And I'm going to give you a couple tricks. And if you listen to my audio essays, I always try to preface this. This is a little bit of a repeat of one of my creative episodes I put on there. But then we're going to talk about several methods and flavors of creativity. And then we're going to talk about the perseverance that really makes it possible for you to stick to your creative juices and make it happen. I promise you, through my experience, bumping into a young kid that doesn't have a lot of experience being creative, you might look at that situation and go, well, that kid's got his whole life ahead of him. He's 20 years old. What if he lives to be 80? He's got 60 years to master everything that you say. Maybe you're in your, after 40 years and you're like, well, it's just, I'm done with that phase of my life. I can't be creative. And if you have no desire to be creative, you won't watch this in the first place. But if you have a desire to be creative, or you already are creative, it's good to know where those creative pockets are in your mind so that you can realize what's in your brain, because there's nothing better than expressing yourself through creativity to your standards. So let's get into it. So I could jump in and go painting, drawing, music, writing, and we will. But at the very, very beginning of the whole thing is a regimen of life. And I've said it on the show a long, long time ago. You know, having been raised in a way that made me creative, whatever method that was, I had a lot of relatives that were creative, and I will tell you that my family was really big on genetic intelligence. And not in any uppity white supremacist way, just that, hey, your uncle's this way, your aunt's this way, your other uncle's that way, your grandpa's this way, and you're related to us, so therefore it runs in your genes. And I'm going to guarantee you that if you become extremely creative and your predecessors in your family tree weren't, you're going to be, and then you procreate. You take the design of your mind and you procreate, you're going to be handing those patterns down to your kids. Now, if you miss the boat and you already have your kids and you're going to come on board, you can still infect their minds. There's no difference. Well, I should say there is a bit of a difference, but you can exacerbate the patterns in their neural net to be creative in their way, right? Because creativity is really a generic stem cell of process in your mind. And it's whatever you put through that membrane that becomes creative. So if someone wants to do music and they've got the creative gene flowing, they put music through it, and that's what they become creative at. If you put art through it, that's what they become creative at. But once you get your creative engine going, you can put anything through it, and then you'll be better than you were before. There's a couple tricks to it to get started. I know I said in a previous episode that my writing mentor sat me down and said, you are way too pragmatic to write films. And this is about 2007. And what that meant is that I'm way too procedural, because I was starting my new company, and even though it's a very creative video game company at the time, I was more into the logistics of running the company at the time, and I had already had a very high-end director position in electronic arts, so very logistic there. And I still always did creative things, but I had allowed the right side of my mind to go dormant, while my left side was helping me run this new area of my life, which for me was very creative in a logistical way. But he was 100% correct in that I had allowed my right brain to sort of go to sleep. It was sort of like if your right arm was your creativity and your left arm was your logic, I had a massive arm over here, and this one had atrophied a little bit. So it was very shocking to hear that, and I knew he was correct, and so I just simply went out and said, okay, fine, I'm inside my company, I'm going to engage more creative tasks as opposed to just being this logistical guy. So that's the first thing you have to do, is look at your life right now and realize how many things do you try to do that are creative and how many things do you do that are just straight up logistical things that you have to do to survive, to pay the bills. To the degree you find yourself swayed very much to the left, your first step before worrying about whatever specific thing you want to be creative at comes into mind. We need to start ebbing you towards a more organic, chaotic frame of mind. Remember, life is chaotic. Society is logistical. So the way we're created to exist on this planet is very chaotic and right brain, which is why a lot of anthropologists believe and philosophers believe that man was very right brain a long, long time ago, and that we've only convinced ourselves recently to be civilized, quote unquote, thus left brain. And because there's always elation in any accomplishment, you might find great endorphin and dopamine dumps in left brain activities because that's what you were most curious about in terms of your abilities. So the first thing we want to do is take inventory of your life. So just look at your life and say, am I the accountant, the tax executive, the controller, the other logistical person, and not a creative person? We need to ebb you further over to the right. Now, the nice thing is that most of us drive a car and we don't think about it. Gas pedal, brake pedal, shifter, steering wheel, signals. We just do it. But when you were a kid and you started driving, it was like monitoring everything constantly. Am I looking at the mirror the right way? Am I holding the steering wheel the right way? Am I going the right speed limit? Am I braking properly? It's all a mind-taxing experience. And what we have to do is get you to the point where it's like today, where you don't think about it anymore. So you can take your left brain stuff, not worry about it, and push it into that automated part of your life. And then we can go over here and pay attention to the right brain, just like when you were a kid driving a car. The universe has a rule, and you can choose to believe this or you can choose not to believe this, but I'm going to tell you this is the rule I follow, and I get rewarded proportionally. Of all the amazing creative people that I know in this world, and they're of all walks of life, from, rockers to rappers to actors to directors to writers to special effect people to comedians that go on stage and own the whole world, they believe this too. So you can get in the club or you can not get in the club. But here's the secret to life: being creative. The universe is full of a bunch of spirits. It's full of a bunch of the previous incarnations of life. Whether or not they've ever been human before is irrelevant. And they are looking at you like a business investment of creativity. Of pretty much everything in life, to be honest with you. But let's just stick to creativity. If you don't gear your external life and internal drive in life to being creative, then when they do a business assessment to invest in you, they're not going to invest in you until you get your act together. They might give you a few little tidbits of inspiration to test you, to see if you're willing to hop on board. And unfortunately, we don't have a black and white relationship with the other realm, and we don't acknowledge it in reality. And, atheists believe you're just fucking dirt talking to people, which I think is unfortunate. I've said a couple times, if you want to play the guitar in a creative way, not in some recital way where you're just buying sheet paper, tapping your foot to the tempo and playing Led Zeppelin or something, if you really want to write your own stuff, you need to get the guitar first and foremost. You need to keep it in your eyesight and within reach every minute of the day that you possibly can, and that means you might need to drag it around the house. Jimi Hendrix grabbed his guitar and took it with him every place he went. From the moment he retired out of the military and had his guitar, he carried it with him constantly. The Fender, the left string, left-handed Fender, right? Not only did he practice it constantly, but he showed the universe, this is my game. If you have a song, a melody, or some piece of wisdom you want me to hand the planet, I'm here. And by taking probably mind-expanding drugs, he was able to open up his mind to the universe and really just harness it 100%. You're him. There's nothing special between him and you except for that he dragged his guitar around like a stepchild. Whatever you want to do, you're going to have to get the basic equipment to do that thing. And my caution to you is don't spend a ton of money. If you want to play guitar, honestly, I think you never want to hear this. If you want to play electric guitar, well, it just depends. You might need to get the electric if you don't like anything else, but I started with an acoustic because it doesn't need an amplifier. I can play it wherever I am. And believe me, once you master the neck of an acoustic, the electrics go a lot faster. But there are a lot of different techniques of how to left-hand, right-hand electric guitar that you need to understand. They're different than an acoustic. Now, there's some of us that can teach ourselves a lot of this stuff, but I don't think that's the way the world's supposed to be in a lot of cases. I think you're supposed to get lessons from people. You're supposed to learn from your friends. And because society gets big in some areas of the world, you may not have friends that know how to do it. So yes, you might need to buy lessons for whatever you're trying to do. And don't feel weird buying lessons. You may not need that many lessons. You may just need someone to kind of get you the basics. But when you go to get lessons for anything that you're doing, you need to be very honest with the teacher as to exactly what your goals are. And again, if you're a painter and you want to paint like Sid Mead, well, you need to bring Sid Mead pictures on your telephone and show the teacher, this is where I'm headed, this is where I want to be. And before you buy the lessons, to say, can you teach me this? Is this what you do? And if they go, well, not really, Sid is better than most people in the entire world in terms of painting, but I can get you this far. I can get you the basics that you need. I can teach you the difference between oil and acrylic, then you make the decision as to whether or not you want to use them as the stepping stone. In almost every case, you can use them as the stepping stone. Now, due to YouTube, you can look up a lot of lessons in anything that you want to do, and it's phenomenal. People giving away knowledge. It's great, right? So the first 2 steps is you need to gear your life to be more right-brained in your pastimes. And you might end up thinking a lot of blank thoughts, like when you're a kid and you're an illustrator, one of the things that always happens as an illustrator is you get a blank piece of paper, and it's a beautiful piece of paper, and it's a beautiful pen or pencil, and you start looking at the paper and you got nothing, man. You got nothing. And so you might end up copying something just to kind of get the juices flowing. Now, a couple things. There is benefit to copying, like I said, recital music playing. If you learn classical music by recital, by reading sheet music and playing it, and you learn how to copy something in terms of art, both those things are great for you, especially if those are new pastimes for you, or if you've been away from it for a little while, just to kind of freshen up and remind yourself of what you're capable of. One of the things I do for artists all the time, when I got into school as a kid, I only had one art teacher that was better than me, I think, where he really drew stuff that was just phenomenal. He's the guy that gave me the F, and later we corrected that grade, but he said, I gave you an F because you're not trying. He goes, you're better than everybody in the class, but you're not trying, and I'm giving you an F because you can do 10 times better. And he was completely correct, but he didn't really explain it to me as well as I just said it to you. I wish I'd understood what he was saying, because all I did was got angry at him for giving me an F, which later became an A. But it was a valuable lesson that I missed, unfortunately, right? And he wasn't jacking up the education was the problem, too. So he was trying to make this profound statement to me, which I needed to hear, but he wasn't saying, all right, come here. Show me what you last drew. Whoop-de-doo. Not very impressive, because you can do a lot better. And I was doing some pretty creative stuff, but he saw more in me than I saw in myself. What he didn't do is pull me aside and give me another piece of artwork that someone else may have done, maybe even him, and say, and he's one of the artists that was better than me, and say, this is what you should be doing, and you should be doing better than this. Even if you said, you should do better than me, that would have blown my mind, because I thought he's a phenomenal sketch artist. What I tell people who want to get into physical art of any kind, any type of illustration, any type of painting, each one comes with different regiments that you have to master. I'm going to get into some of the specifics just so you kind of hear the way that I'm approaching this, because, there's something called a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question is one you already know the answer to, and it's merely trying to make a statement through a question to make you reach inside yourself and find the answer that you know you already have. Well, that's sort of how I approach creativity teaching and art education. I've taught little kids. When my daughter went to school, they didn't have any art classes, so I went in and taught them all how to draw faces. 2 classes, these kids, well, actually in the first class, these kids could go home and draw any face that they wanted to, and just like a Mr. Potato Head, change the nose, change the hair, change the eyes, and they looked great. They weren't stupid cartoony things. They were actually fairly professional looking drawings, and these kids were like 9 and 10 years old. When I get stuck on planes with loud kids, I usually, if I have proximity to them, especially if they're right next to me, I've taken little kids on planes, and I give them a piece of paper, and I say, let's draw some faces. And the kids just fall right into it. They're bored as hell anyway on these planes, and they shut up, and they start building skills, and they show their parents their drawings, and their parents are like, no way did my kid draw this. I'm like, yes way. It's just a good teacher. That's all that makes the kid draw better, What I tell people who are concerned about their creative abilities with their hands is I say, look, if you have an alphabet that your language relies on, and if you slow down and you draw A through Z, whatever your alphabet is, especially some of these Middle Eastern languages, they have these beautiful, detailed, penmanship. They have to actually write correctly, otherwise you can't tell what the hell they're writing, Whereas in English, you can just butcher it. If you're relying on the A through Z alphabet for whatever language you speak, you can butcher it and people still see what you're writing, right? I say, look, if you have the directional coordination to draw A through Z, then you have the coordination. You've always had the coordination to draw anything that you see, because everything is just a little letter hovering in front of your face. They're just all stitched together, that's all. So my face is made out of a lot of different letters. This horrible high forehead I have in my face, it's just a big oval. It's a big elongated O, right? My glasses are made of a couple rectangles. You can patch a few letters together to make that. There's some pretty straight lines here. Most people can draw straight lines. So, and you've heard me say this once before, but that's the way you get started, understanding that you already have rhetorical skills that actually feed into these things that you want to do. But I want you to consistently concentrate on this idea I'm giving you. The universe is a massive consciousness. Please try not to get too tied down into paradigms of certainty about how the world works, especially if you're basking in atheism, right? All that stuff closes out your mind, it kills your mind, and it tells you what you can't do before you've even tried. And it's not fair for someone to close your mind to anything, to close your mind in science, to close your mind in love, to close your mind in creativity. And it just takes one bad experience, one try, and one failure, according to your own standards, to make you close down your creativity, to say, screw this. I don't like failing, and I don't like anything that reminds me of failure. So the first thing we want to do is say, screw everybody else. I mean, screw everybody else when it comes to you. This is between you and you. And so you have to own that part of your life. Otherwise, you're not going to get what you want out of it. And that might sound stupid and trivial, but I guarantee you that's a stupid, trivial thing that happens to everyone all day long. And we're all guilty of having gone through that. So I want to talk to you about perseverance before we get deeper into creativity real quick, because there's a trick. I said this on one other episode. I believe in expressing yourself. But since we're on the exact subject of creativity, I want to make sure... Oops, I almost did that. I just did a little... For those of you who can't see this, I'm doing hand gestures. I have to be careful here. Perseverance goes like this. If you never stop, and it's a possibility. It's a possibility that you could succeed. And you never stop. Then you're going to succeed. And that's why you hear from all the famous people in the world who were ever interviewed about their creativity, not the ones that are bullshit celebrities that just, they made a porn and they got famous. That's not creativity. I mean, maybe it is, but it's not the kind of stuff you probably want to get yourself into. True creativity, true art, true expression. And we're going to get into expression versus creativity here in a second. The thing I used to teach in the 90s, in the mid-90s to folks was that for those that succeed in the world, and at the time I was using Spielberg and Lucas, you can put in there anyone you think is utterly creative. I guarantee you what I'm about to say is what your hero does. Male, female, old, young, this is what they do. They never stop. Now you might go, well, they're special. In fact, they're super talented, so their strife in trying is not as hard as the strife I feel when I'm trying. Totally incorrect. Okay. It's very, very tough. What I tell people is there's a curve of difficulty with anything that you try creatively, And that is that when you start the process, it's euphoric because it's all a dream. You're planning to do something. You haven't actually done it yet. And so there's that fun 40, what I call it. It's like where you're all sort of in the logistical setup to try to do what you want to do. This doesn't matter if you are a scientist or a painter or whatever. It's the same old thing. The ramp of difficulty goes up. And it gets harder and harder and harder, usually only in the first time. And, as you succeed, it gets easier and easier. Once you complete this cycle once, you start to feel this pattern. And this pattern becomes euphoric all the way through from soup to nuts. It doesn't mean it's not hard, difficult, and defeating in its feeling. It just means that this is the cycle, how it works. And again, the better you become at something, the more you erode the curve of difficulty and that feeling of angst, right? But at the very beginning, it usually ramps up very, very sharply because you haven't been here before. But here's this interesting thing. There's this point in the curve where it plateaus. It can't get any worse than it is right now. Every day you wake up and you approach this creative goal, you almost feel a barrier like you can't do it. And some people jump out at that point. I've got relatives that jump out at that point or have jumped out at that point. And they seem to think, I'm going to use a religious analogy, but they seem to think that God is telling them, that this is your sign you're not supposed to do this. What I like to think of in my mind, this is what's kept me going through my life, is that this is a test from God. And not necessarily God, but remember those spirits I talked about that are investing in you. They're testing you to say, we're not going to give you Star Wars, as your first run unless you're willing to push through the eye of the needle. If you're willing to persevere and push through this eye of the needle, we're willing to back you. But you're going to have to go through a birthing process first. This just shows you've got the stamina and the perseverance and the conviction to make this a career, because we want to invest in you long term. We don't want to invest in you in this one-off little thing. We're not trying to make you a one-hit wonder. And usually one-hit wonders aren't the first songs that they created, right? They created a bunch of crappy songs first. Like the Beatles said they wrote, 40 songs before they came out with their first album as kids. So they pushed through a lot of pain, and they pushed through collaborative conflicts between the members of the band. Now, if you're by yourself, then it's just you. Now, if you can find help, then find help. Okay, I'm not trying to say you shouldn't reach out for help, especially if you have someone that's really good at it already in your midst. Then just explain to them you're having problems. This is what you're trying to get through. I work with Kyle on my guitar. I'm like, dude, I'm trying to figure out this solo, and I'm trying to speed up my fingers in this one little riff, and show it to me. Show me how you're fingering this, And he'll show me. He'll just blast it out in front of me, and I'm like, oh, God, okay, I got to figure that out. And so I just sit in front of my television just thumbing this thing, and I'm screwing it up, but I'm showing the universe, look, I'm in this to win this, right? When you write scripts, there's this area of script writing. Now, if you haven't watched my episode on screenwriting, please do, because I guarantee you've got a film inside you, and I give you the soup to nuts beginner course that I've never seen anywhere, and I point you to my teacher, Robert McKee, who will get you on your feet beautifully, either with his book or his seminars, right? His book is called Story. If you're going to get into writing, you got to buy it. I suggest you get it on audiobook because it's read by the author himself, and he's a very good reader and charismatic person in real life and on the book. But this plateau comes in, and the guys that have done this before and the gals that have done this before, what they do is that they realize that they're very, very close to success when they start feeling the plateau. And they realize they just got to push through it, no matter what. Moving that ball forward 1 millimeter a day gets you closer to your goal. Guarantee it. If you're worried about a deadline, I would say there's two ways to look at that. If you're going for a particular deadline in life, and I'll give you an example of my own life here in a second, then you do have some extra pressure you put on yourself. But let's ease back. Maybe you might meet the deadline. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll participate in this round of whatever it is you're trying to be involved in, and maybe you won't. It's not usually the end of the world if you're going for a contest or some other type of event that needs a deadline. Maybe you missed that particular year, but by the next year, you've got something really cool. Ease off the pressure on yourself a little bit, especially if this is your first time. I'll give you one of my own examples. And a friend of mine just reminded me I did this back in the late 80s. I lived down here in Southern California, but in the Ventura County area, which is about an hour and a half north of here. And I was surrounded by writers, people who wrote. There's a husband and wife couple that wrote a bunch of stuff in Hollywood, Edward Scissorhands and a bunch of other crazy stuff. And they happened to go to the church that I went to. And so they're professionals. They've been in it for 20 years, and they were mentoring me, and I shouldn't have actually moved away like I did, but I got a bunch of cool computer skills in the Silicon Valley area shortly after I met them. But they started kind of slowly mentoring me about writing, and nothing really deep, but just sort of like, we believe in you, go, 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 go. And this is, of course, after interviewing me and talking to me about my creativity and stuff. But it still was a pie-in-the-sky little dream for a kid. But in actually probably about 1990, honestly, there was a contest to write an episode for Married with Children, which was a sitcom here in America some of you might have seen. So it's a teleplay. And they're looking for about 22 minutes, 22 pages of a sitcom. And I'd never written a sitcom before, but I was watching this show like crazy. And that's the kiss of death to think that because you consume something, you're immediately qualified to write it. But I went into it thinking, well, I have no idea if I can do this. I'm just going to do this because I've never done it before. And I wrote a fairly clever episode at home, And I happened to be dating someone that was really into my creativity, so it really, really helped. Every time I would turn in a page or 2 or 5 or 6 and show it to her or read it to her or act it out to her, she gave me just an incredible affirmation and feedback that I needed, which was really, really cool. But at the same time, I didn't beat myself up for the deadline being met or not met. And I sent it in, and what I later realized was these were, these were workshops in Hollywood. When you have a workshop to write a film, and they say, everybody send us your films. They're trying to steal your stuff is basically what they're trying to do. Now, I don't know if this particular contest was trying to do that, but I sent it in, and I have no idea what other people sent in, and definitely, most likely, I'm trying to find the script. I can't find it right now, and I think I just wrote it in like Microsoft Word or something. I didn't have screenwriting software at the time. This is probably garbage. But the experience got me over the hump of realizing I can write things, and I was always writing novel sort of things up to that point, but I was always biting off too much. These novels needed to be 1,500-page novels, and so I would get really, really far down the line and then exhaust my friends' interest in these scripts, or their life would get busy, and I would quit. Without really consciously quitting, I just never went back and finished some of these things up. And when I learned how to write screenplays through Sid Field's books, I started taking the novels and moving them into screenplay form, and I thought, wow, this format's way more like me. It's more disciplined. There's more constraints. There's more visual articulation of what I'm writing, as opposed to just saying, he thought this, she did this, and this is the whole backstory. I get to spend a chapter on a backstory. In a film, you can't do that. In a film, a single line of prose, dialogue, can tell a whole backstory about someone having a crazy, past. And so that was what was really kind of getting on, becoming appealing to me. So that's you. If you have something where you want to get into an art contest or something as a project to motivate you, then just, if you're a beginner, just lay off yourself a little bit in terms of when you have to finish this thing. Just say, I'm getting into this, and I'm going to spend however much time it takes to get into this. And just remember, every time you walk in your office or your patio or wherever you're doing this, you're sitting with your laptop on your lap on the sofa watching television, if you can do that, whatever you're doing, sticking to it is sort of telling the universe that you are in it to win it. You're also telling your insides that this is the new way of life. That you're telling your insides, you know what, giving up just isn't an option. I don't care if I finish this painting and I hate it, or if I finish the script and it's horrible, I will have finished the script. Like I told you in a previous episode, my buddy who directed, was the first American-made Belgian film in world history. He bumped into Tarantino at the Directors Guild Association, and Tarantino gave him a huge hug. And he said, what's that for? And he said, I'm just giving you a hug because you finished it. Because it's hard to make a film. You're managing hundreds of people, you're kissing ass and bending over to make this thing happen. And when you're done, the next time is going to be a hell of a lot easier. I'll give you a weird example. When my child was born, the hospital had sort of this unwritten policy that new mothers don't get the epidural, that shot in your back. Am I saying that right? They don't get the shot in the back to kill the pain, because they say, we want you to feel the pain on the first child. And I thought that was interesting. They said, look, you need to suffer through this first kid, because this is a big responsibility you're getting into, and we're not here to make it painless for you, because this child's going to be needing you every split second of the day for several years. You're going to wipe your child's butt for 4 to 5 years minimum. And so you need to be engaged and shocked into the responsibility that it takes to raise a child. And your creativity is sort of the same exact thing, especially to the degree you haven't been creative in your recent past, okay? So your perseverance is way more than just a word. It's a mechanism to create your place in the universe to be creative. It's a way to tell the universe that you're going to be creative. Before we jump into more specifics, I want you to take inventory of your life and your mind as you live your life. Think about all the times that you have imagined that something could be better. You watch a television show and you're like, oh man, you'll watch a television program or a movie, and the story's headed in one direction, and eventually it doesn't go in the direction you thought it could go in. And you're like, wow, my idea was so much better than what was actually portrayed in this film. And sometimes the film or the television show is very, very famous for what they did. Now, sometimes you simply didn't have the better idea and you thought you did, but a lot of times you do. So take inventory of how many times you do that. When I go to Disneyland every once in a while, because I'm like 8 miles away, I'll ride rides, I'll look at the park, I'll look at the design on the outside, and I'll think, wow, this could be a lot better if they just do that one little thing a little bit differently. I'm plagued with this brain that just can't let go of things. And so if you go with me to Disneyland, I'm always like, if we're stuck in line for 45 minutes baking in the sun, I'm just going to spend some time riffing on possible alternatives to what's going on for a little while, and then I'll shut up. When I watched the movie Shrek for the very first time, I watched the trailer and then I watched the movie, and I had an idea for Shrek that I thought that they were doing, and they didn't do it. And I'll just give you an example. Shrek was this weird character, and I guess he's actually an old character that's been around for ages. He's not just a creation of a PDI, Sony. But what I thought the whole thing was going to be about, which is kind of funny, was I thought, Shrek is this unknown character to most of the world. But there are all these other, the Three Little Pigs, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, all these other Grimm Brothers characters that have been developed over the year, Hansel and Gretel and all those kind of things. And they have established stories, and we told those to our kids, and luckily we changed the horrific ending of the Grimm Brothers versions. Apparently, Germans who wrote most of this stuff thought it was great to tell kids about being eaten by women and stuff to get them to behave, which is interesting. And now that life has lightened up a little bit, we wrote some happy endings, and that's where Disney has rebranded every single one of those to be a happy ending, right? But the original stories, all the kids die almost every single time. It's crazy. So I thought, if you're trying to put the Shrek guy on the map, then why not put him on the map at the very beginning of the franchise in a heroic manner to make the other stories, the other famous characters, right? The Seven Dwarfs, all these different characters have respect for Shrek, and vicariously through them having respect for Shrek and Shrek doing something to have respect for them, he can be on the map as a character that is really amazing. But they didn't quite do that. They gave him his own little life story, and if you're interested in it, you're interested. If you're not, you're not. But they didn't brand him as in a relationship with these other characters in a deep way. They just said, they're there, he's here, so you're in this imaginary universe. And it's sort of like this kitschy environmental quality that they built into the landscape of the film, but they didn't engage it. So my idea, which is what I thought they were going to do, was that someone has captured all of the story characters that we know, and they're holding them hostage. The whole film. The whole first film, I wanted it to be, if it's a 3-act format, first act and second act, they're completely captured. In the third act, he breaks them all free. And Shrek saves the day and saves all the other fables that we know, such that we get to have them, as opposed to them being erased by some dark force. And then he'd be on the map as the hero, right? Never happened. Got close. A couple of them were held captive here and there, but they were broken out in the first act, and it was just... That's me being creative by simply being misdirected. The trailer made me think that that's what the film was about. And when I saw the film, I was like, that's not as interesting as I thought it was. We thought it could be, right? So I can't go out and write Shrek 2 and make that happen, right? It's a blown franchise. It's whatever they've created him to be. And, of course, they're making gazillions of dollars off of it, so they've made some fantastic decisions. And, of course, back in the day, 50% of the reason to buy the ticket was there was a gorgeous 3D rendered product out of this company called PDI, which was bought by Sony. Now, you have something like that in you. Now, it might be that you go to an art museum and you're just crushed because you look at these amazing artists. And it happens to me all the time where I go and look at either classic artists like a Rembrandt or a Picasso or a Gaudi sort of painting. And I'm just like, oh my God, at 1900, these guys are doing incredible, or already had completed the most amazing paintings in the world. And if I start today and I do nothing more than try to paint like them, maybe in 20 years I'll get close to their techniques. So that's a way to go in and get defeated in your mind. Instead of saying, wait a minute, Van Gogh painted completely different than Picasso, than Rembrandt, all these different guys. They're all totally different. So why on earth would I go in trying to compete in that realm by trying to be exactly like them? Picasso to this day is barely understood because the guy simply said, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to do something different. And he took Cubism to a whole new level, right? Sorry, I drank a beer for lunch and I'm paying the price for it. So let's get into your style super duper quick here, because I'm not going to make this a super long episode. You have a unique life experience that is your experience. And you have seen people in your life in all walks of life of creativity bring their life experience to the table and blow away everyone, including you. The things that you love in life are typically someone who's had a certain level of experience, and they're bringing it to you. Now, some folks are like Sid Mead. He has never lived in the future. But if you haven't seen this guy's artwork, he is the future. He is a soul from, 300 years in the future, at least. And he can't create today. He creates the future. It's phenomenal. But he has an amazing, immaculate understanding of the past. And so he looks at the algorithms in the mind and he says, this is what everyone's used to car looking like. This is the functional requirements of a vehicle based on propulsion systems today. We need tires because things drive. Well, what if it lifted off the ground? Well, what if it lifted off the ground and had to spend a little bit of time on the ground? This is where you get the Blade Runner spinner car, which Sid did, which is one of the cars he's most famous for. He did the light cycle in Tron. In fact, the Tron Legacy is finally realizing more of his original design in 1982 than the 3D rendering software was able to pull off in 82. Right. Okay. Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails guy, right? His music was completely wild. I mean, it was almost like rancid textures of sawtooth synths, and he was very angry because he had been through life and fallen in love and had a woman just rip his heart out. So his whole first album was about the torment of his life, right? You have some unique experience in your life. Now, if you've had a wonderful life and it's completely positive, then you can be like a Sid Mead and create bright future. I've talked to Sid a couple times about Blade Runner, and everyone always asks Sid, what's your most prized possession in terms of your life creation? And of course, he loves everything he's ever done. But he said, probably Blade Runner is the one that really was the most amazing experience because he was only hired to do the cars. And the way that Sid did it was he did the cars, and then he said, well, I need a backdrop that actually marries the car. And so he started doing these crazy futuristic city backgrounds, and Ridley Scott looked at it and said, what's up with these environments you're creating? Does someone brief you on the environments? Because this is exactly what it needs to look like. And you just put it in your drawings. And Sid's like, well, I'll do little one-off pictures of the vehicles that you want on a white background. But he goes, that's not the way I operate. He goes, I like scenario. And so I always put every object that I draw in a believable scenario to give it the context of why it looks the way it looks. And that's what made Blade Runner end up looking like it did, because Sid just couldn't make a car by itself. And they ended up hiring him to do interior designs, the cars. He even did a gun that wasn't used. He did a lot of the neon signs and stuff. Now, they had other groups that came on and said and finalized designs and decals and stuff. There's a whole other art team that just should be celebrated as well. But Sid was the main driving force behind the whole thing. We all have that ability to do that, to create an environment that's really cool. For some of you that feel trapped in your lives, let's just kind of take a little 90-degree turn towards this thing, right? Let's say you're in a world where you're like, man, I don't like the town I live in, but I got to live here because my ex-wife's got the kids across the street and I can't leave. I'm forced to live here because it's all I know and I'm terrified of the rest of the world. Fine. Any one of those worlds where you feel constricted and constrained, do this for me. With whatever art you decide to get into, whether it be drawing, painting, storytelling, music, whatever, start creating the world that you wish you lived in. And I can almost assure you, you'll get there because people will like what you do. You'll get jobs you never imagined, and you'll end up making the income that you want, and you'll never feel like you're working. It's really cool. And I don't give a crap how old you are. Hell, if you're really old, then just do it as retirement. If you think you've got it 10 years before you're going to retire, then why don't you pine for retirement? My friends will never retire. I've said it before. They're going to die with their pens in their hands. They're going to die doing whatever they love to do because it's not work for them. It's their life blood coming out through expression. Right. So it's another way to force the constraint to work for you as opposed to the other, it constraining you down so you can't do anything at all with your life. Now, there's a really trite question that gets asked to every single person who's creative when they get into an interview, and they say, well, where do your ideas come from? And every single creative person rolls their eyes, and they're just like, geez, if you ever knew where it comes from, you'd never ask the question in the first place. The answer goes all the way back to the thing I said at the beginning, which is the universe will give you what you need if you invest in the universe. One of my favorite stories in the entire world is about a writer named Philip K. Dick. Philip K. Dick wrote a book called Do Robots Dream of Electric Sheep, which was then rewritten into Blade Runner, the film. What he did was write worlds that were extremely detailed, extremely dark. He was in a positive world writing about a dark subject because I think he had some physical elements that sort of constrained him a little bit. So he routed that energy into these very intense science fiction worlds, not sci-fi, right? Science fantasy is different than science fiction. Science fiction is more like your 2001: A Space Odyssey, where Star Wars is your sci-fi, science fantasy, right? You can go wherever you want with this. But he talked about a river of knowledge that he would see. And I can say I've felt it myself. And what it is that you show the universe that you're committed. And it might take you a while to tap into this universe, or this river, I should say. But everything that ever could be has already happened somewhere in the universe, most likely. It's just sort of the odds of the universe. So all the know-how on how your mortal coil, with your limitations and your abilities, right? You have a Swiss Army knife that only has so many little extensions off of it. That's you. If I gave one guy a Swiss Army knife with 4 things, and I gave a girl a Swiss Army knife with 4 different things on it, I said, both of you need to make that pyramid right there with your Swiss Army knives. And I don't mean it literally, but just metaphorically with your talents that you have. I know personally that as long as they never quit and they live for however long it takes, they're going to be able to create the pyramids with whatever tools they're given. And they might need to create new tools. But they're only going to start with so much stuff, and they're going to push towards the same goal and make it happen. I had a conversation with LL Cool J because we were building this online music studio, and no one had ever done it before, and we were doing it. We succeeded in the prototype, and it was working beautifully, and he ended up selling it under his brand Boom Dizzle. But he stopped to motivate the office full of about 5 of us, and he said, look, when I was making my first album, which is Radio, he said, no one got me up in the morning. No one wrote the lyrics for me. And he goes, look, the little crew I brought together, we're all young kids. We're like 15, 16, 17 years old. And he goes, they'd never done it before. So they had no belief that they could do it before, in their minds. But what LL did, and the reason why he's special, and the reason why his name's on the front of the box, okay, not only is he the front man that's phenomenal for what he does, he said, look, I never gave up. I kept pushing and pushing and pushing every single day. And I still had to go to school, and I still had to, make some money somewhere, because I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing until we got the first track finished. And I didn't ask him which track was his first track, but Radio was his big first track, that blew away everybody. But I'm sure he created a bunch of stinkers before that, right? Finally got a really good producer. He was the guy that motivated me as a kid. And so to hear him say that to me, I was like, well, that's sort of my life too. It's how I'm able to help you make this studio right now. But it just galvanized me even further. And I think I was probably about my late 30s or something like that when he was telling me this. And he's like a year and a half older than me. So I'm also looking at a guy around my age. And he was a big actor on NCIS LA. And he still is. But he's still in the music business. He's still an entrepreneur. We're making this crazy cool thing. And so I've heard him say his version of the universe will back you. He's very religious, so for him it's always God. And that's just fine. I sort of think the same thing, but I do think that there are very specific voices that come down out of the universe. But now, to go back to Philip K. Dick for 1 second. Philip, They always said Nostradamus looked into the flame of a candle to write his prophecies, and who knows if that guy's even real, If he is real and if he really wrote what he wrote, then my God, there is a way to look into the future. Like the universe will simply give you tidbits of the future, but I think he might be more fable than reality. But Philip is very real, and Philip would say that he would see this river of light when he was writing, and that when he would bottom out as to what creatively he was supposed to do, he would kind of look off somewhere in the room, and his mind's eye would just lose all focus, like when you look at one of those 3D pictures, right? And he would start seeing knowledge. And it got so critical that, so amazingly connected to him that when he had a son, his wife was holding the baby in the kitchen, and he all of a sudden had this weird epiphany that his son had an anomaly in his gut. His intestine was twisted around, and then he was going to die, like right away. You get this horrible, panicky feeling, and this is big 6'3" writer guy with his writer hump and stuff. And he rushes into the kitchen, he grabs his kid, and he says, "We got to go to the hospital right now, come on." And she's just like, whoa, what are you talking about? And he's like, "The kid's got a problem right here, and we've got to get him to the hospital right now, he's going to die." Rush him to the hospital, they do some little scans on his body, they find out he's completely correct. He even named the medical terms for the organs that were having problems in the kid, and they said, "You're entirely correct about this problem in your kid. Now, your kid might have been able to live another month and a half, but your kid would have had probably a SIDS death, unexplained, until an autopsy were to look in and find this problem. But we're now correcting it, and your kid's going to be fine." That's how powerful this relationship with the universe is that people poo-poo away because we're so civilized that we've closed our minds. If you really want to play in the game of creativity, this isn't some small little venue. This is a whole different frontier of your capabilities as related to the universe itself. So it's a big deal. Being creative is a massive thing. And when we hear anthropologists say that there's a lot of evidence that people lived off of telepathy way back in the day because we didn't have spoken language to articulate things beautifully. I don't know what we did, but they said that, look, you have these advanced societies that are able to seemingly pass knowledge from one person to another, but we don't find any tablets of written language. It maybe took them a long time to write it down, but we can assume Homo sapiens figured out something because we're the dominant species on this planet, and we couldn't survive outside for any length of time as of today. So something went right. And I think that the more that you engage, the more you're going to find this is true. When it first happens to you, you're going to freak out. One of the things that happened to me, I used to write lots of music for video games and my own recreation. And I'd go into my studio and I'd stare at my keyboard and I'd have nothing, just like that blank piece of paper. And one time I went to my studio, I couldn't write anything, went outside, laid out, came inside, was about to go to the shower, walked in my studio, I looked at my keyboard, I still had nothing. And all of a sudden, it was like I was possessed. Hands go up to the keyboard, boom. Two-finger song, get the bass chords, the upper solo stuff. I started singing lyrics I'd never heard before in my life. I hit record. I taped a really crude demo, went and took my shower, came in, worked for the next 4 hours, made 3 versions of the song, handed it to my girlfriend, it's a little love song. And, that's how I felt the fact that there's this river of knowledge. But, here I am showing the universe, I'm not giving up. My studio was always powered, always ready to go. Even in the night, if I woke up at 2 a.m, I could rush in the studio, grab any one of my instruments, hit the digital recorder, and start playing. And even if it was crap, and I got tons of cassette tapes of crap, it was something. And so the universe is like, okay. And the other thing, too, is that how will you respond once you're given something? Let's say that someone gives you this amazing painting or story or music. Are you going to do anything with it? Are you going to sit on it by yourself? You're going to share it with people? You're going to try to get it to someone that's going to take it somewhere? And right now, with the internet and the music industry totally busted, you can get it right on to iTunes without any problem whatsoever. You might need to make some phone calls to DJs and stations to make someone play it. And if you can get something hot on the internet before anyone signs you, my God, the contract you can sign is crazy. Imagine this Psy guy that made Gundam Style, right? Imagine him putting that song out as his first track. Probably wouldn't have been able to make it without some help, but he makes it, he gets it out there, and YouTube, has 2 billion views on the video? What if he were able to make a 1 billion view video song and no one's ever heard of the guy in the music industry. He's going to get the best, fattest royalty contract ever. Because if he does it even one more time, whoever signs a contract with him is never going to have to work again for as long as they live. That could be you. And I'm not trying to sell you pie in the sky. This is very mathematical responsibility. I'm telling you it's going to be hard most likely, but you need to understand it's okay if it's hard. It's part of the process. It's part of your battle wounds in making anything happen. So your homework is this. I want you to take inventory as you go throughout your life. And you can do this for a year before you actually take any action as a result of this. But what I want you to do is to realize how you would have changed anything in the world. Could be that you don't like the way the traffic light modulates traffic. Could be that you look at your car and you're like, man, this is stupid. Like in America, all of the window controls are now down in the center console because they don't want to pay the money to route wires to the doors to let people have access to their own windows. It's ridiculous. It's lazy. But they're saving a buck. But there's all kinds of these things when you see them. It's okay to copy it first to get your skills going. The second tier of this whole thing is to put your emotion into something, which is where you really get into your own personal creativity. So I want to encourage you to think about how you feel. Colors mean things to different people. I covered a lot of this in my expression episode, but I want to reassert this. And when I did the expression episode, the show was barely watched, and so I want to kind of leapfrog the information forward with a more centralized charter of creativity, right? For some people, the color red is blood, and it's scary because they had some experience when they were kids. For some, it's the hot rod car. They wouldn't have it any other way. Look at your clothing, look at the items that you've purchased that you're very proud of in your life, and figure out why it's your favorite shirt. Why is it your favorite car, your favorite bike, your favorite whatever? Figure out why. Because that's your creativity and your expression and your emotion and your attachment to those concepts, the shapes, the colors, the smells, whatever it is that thing that makes you you. So as you create art, try to tap into the things that you like to create things that you like. Right. It's not that hard. Now, the other one that I want to impress on you before I shut up here is, I said in the last episode, try things you've never tried before. And I really, really mean that. I want you to erase, if you have this thought, I want you to erase this notion that somehow some people are born to write movies and direct them, and some, you may not be that kind of person, or whatever the heck it is you want to do. You're just as qualified as anybody else. I don't care if you're in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the neck down. If you can communicate, even with your eyeballs looking at letters, you can make art, and you can make something wonderful. In fact, you might be more centered to do so. But for those of us who are completely healthy, we have no excuse. There's always time. Maybe you carry a notebook with you constantly, and you carry it in the bathroom with you. You carry it with you at work when you go to lunch. You don't take a big lunch with your buddies at the restaurant. You bring a lunch, or you buy something really small, and you sit on a bench, and you just think, and you get into your creative ideas. Now, if you're super scientific, maybe your creativity is making a cure to something. Maybe it's a machine that cures a problem. Maybe it's a medicine that cures an illness. Whatever it is, there's creativity there for you to exude what you do. It doesn't always have to be paint and music and all that stuff, right? I just don't have a lot of experience succeeding in those areas or even trying, so I'm just trying to give you metaphors for what I do, right? You may need a few pieces of equipment, but again, don't go off and spend a tremendous amount of money on equipment. My buddy Sid, he always says, look, people get themselves into what's called a tech trap. And he goes, they buy all this expensive stuff thinking that somehow that's going to imbue them with skill and creativity. And it doesn't. In fact, they don't know the difference between a $4 brush and a $30 brush. And so there's no benefit to buying the $30 brush. Screwing up with the $4 brush and having the hairs come out of it because it's a cheap piece of crap. That's the reason why you buy a $30 brush, is to make sure you buy it one time instead of buying 4 little ones. Because the second you're painting in a bristle comes off inside the brush, depending on what kind of painting you're doing, it could completely destroy your painting just trying to lift that off the canvas. You're going to need a pair of tweezers to get it off the canvas, and at that time it might have spread paint where you don't want it to be painted. Sid paints things in such detail that when we zoom it up on a wall, when it's like a little tiny 1/4-inch circle on a piece of paper, he's painted a 3D logo in a 1/4-inch circle. And when we blow it up on the wall 8 feet tall, and it's now a medallion about this big on the wall, all the details there, because the brother knows how to paint with a single hair on a brush. Utterly phenomenal, utterly photographic. My other word of advice is to only study the masters. A lot of people who are more on the side of critiquing things, they say, well, you got to see everything to know what you're doing. And I completely disagree with that. Everything that you ingest pollutes your mind. So stick with the masters that inspire you. You don't have to know every single Led Zeppelin song. Just study the ones that you really like. Study the movies that you really like, the stories that you really like, the science that you really like, whatever it is that you're interested in. Try to stick with the top dog masters with whatever you're doing. Infect yourself with only perfection. And then what you have as a standard at that point, you have utter perfection from utter masters. You know, if I gave you a time machine, I said, well, you can study from Leonardo da Vinci, or you can study from my guy who lived down the street 40 years ago. Well, who are you going to pick? Right? So why do that in your normal life? Don't ingest everything. Ingest only the very, very best. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. This is a bit of a repeat from stuff in the past, but I just thought I've been wanting to do creativity just as this is just a 1 hour thing. So it's like a shot in the arm to say, go, go, go. Have faith in yourself. Screw any paradigm that's closed-minded. Get your mind open and wide back open. Divorce your left brain. Get into your right brain. Show the universe that you are dedicated to what you're doing. And the universe will back you up 100%. And the first time you feel it, you're going to smile and hopefully think of this episode and realize, holy crap, this is the real secret. There's a movie called Secret, which actually works too. The better one is to see What the Bleep Do We Know, which is what it's based off of. But once you realize there's magic in the universe, I mean real adult magic, that you have an artery to the universe, that everything that's ever been done, you can tap into the manuals on how to do it. Be that guy, be that girl, do it. Anyway, thanks for listening. As always, go to mkultureradio.com. If you want to subscribe, it's right down there. If you want to like it over there. For those of you who haven't got into YouTube, there's a video of this whole thing. That's about all I'm going to say. If you have questions about your journey that are related to creativity, you're like, yeah, you said this, but I'm running into this problem, do comment down below. You can hit us on Facebook as well. But the YouTube's cool because if you create a really cool question, I respond to it, then everyone gets the benefit from that input. So we really like to try to build a community there as much as we possibly can. Anyway, learn the rules that rule you. Hopefully this was helpful. Take care of yourself, take care of somebody else, and we'll see you in the next video. Over now.